Hi, I'm PoChu AuYeung, Program Manager and Senior Programmer for the Vancouver International Film Festival. We're very, very pleased to be able to have the team behind the documentary, The Six, who are joining us for a conversation. And first, I'd like to introduce you to the executive producer, Tong.
Hi. I'm the producer.
Yes.
We do have quite a few executive producers, but I am the producer. Hi, everyone.
Hi. And then we have Arthur Jones, the director for the film, who is also joining us from Shanghai.
Hi there.
Hi. And then we have Stephen Schwankert, who is joining us from the US. And Stephen is I think the researcher, right? You're also a very key part of the film, you know. And so, yeah, without much ado, I want to jump right into the question, asking you, how did you chance upon this story, given that it's been not made public for so long, and you know it's been sort of like hidden, as a matter of fact. So I'm just curious, how do you chance upon the story?
So Arthur and I had done a previous project. We'd done a previous documentary project. It was also a maritime history project. It was also a China maritime history project. And we had a lot of fun doing it. We felt it was successful, you know, even if it wasn't necessarily a commercial success. It was, you know, we really enjoyed the process, and we learned a lot, and we felt that we, you know, did a good job. And then, you know, we wanted to do another one. We thought, well, that was fun. Let's do another one. And then, so I was poking around, you know, in some other maritime history topics that you know I wanted to look at, especially with the China angle. And you know, we had actually started work on a separate story, also a China shipwreck story, but a separate story. And then, sort of in the process of researching that, this, you know, the Chinese passengers aboard Titanic came up almost as a point of reference. And the more I started to think about it, the more I thought, gee, this is really the story we should be working on. This is, you know, I mean, Chinese passengers on Titanic. I mean, who, you know, it's not well known, and there was very little information about it. And, you know, so I presented it to Arthur, and he had a little bit of a different take on it.
Well, my take was that we just finished doing a maritime history story, and that maybe it, you know, 4 years of maritime history is maybe enough for my, you know, immediate documentary career future. And so I thought about it for a while, but it turned out that there was so much enthusiasm for the story in people around us, and you know, despite the fact that I had misgivings about doing more maritime history, it was such a strong story. One of those stories that you just don't often come across, where you can, you know, the classic elevator pitch. You could do this between 2 floors. It didn't take the whole building to pitch this. You know, it was so quick to say, hey, did you know there were Chinese passengers on Titanic? And pretty much everyone was like, that's crazy, really? And so, and especially in China, but, you know, to be honest, everywhere, people were fascinated by the idea that there was a completely uncovered story in Titanic, especially a human story, you know, a story about passengers. And so it became fairly easy in the end to say, this is something that I think it would be a terrible mistake not to make this. And it's that's, I think, been you know, proven right. I mean, a lot of filmmakers have said to us, wow, what an amazing story, you know, how come this wasn't made before, and that kind of thing. So you know, it was something that I had misgivings about, but very quickly it became clear that it was a story that had momentum of its own and needed to be made.
So when was that idea came about? What year was that? And how did Louis Tong get involved in the project? So when you mentioned you find out the story and you approach Arthur, when was that?
So that was probably 2013 when we were finishing up the Poseidon Project, our previous documentary, in which Louis Tong was also involved. I mean, it was, you know, we had all sort of worked together on the Poseidon Project, so we were known to each other. And then it was just, it took about a year or so to kind of come together to prove the concept to ourselves and say, you know, there's enough here that we can make something that we're not going to, you know, we're not going to go spend 6 months doing research and then realize, gee, there's not much more out there than what's already available online. So that's, you know, and then after that, it took a little while to pick up steam. Tong gave us our steam. She gave us the boost that we needed.
Well, that's the thing too. I'm just gonna, because it was, when you say it started, the idea came about in 2013, right? So
Yes.
This film actually takes like, you know, 7-8 years to make. And you know, the fact that when you say about like, because I guess most of the time are spent on the meticulous research. So perhaps you can elaborate a bit on how do you reach out to these research team, you know, all over the world?
When we started out, it was just Arthur and myself kind of doing it when we had time, and you know, when the compulsion absolutely overtook us, which was probably more often than we liked. But once we got rolling, once we realized that we had a story there, we thought, okay, now we can start putting the pieces together on this. It's just like a jigsaw puzzle, except that the jigsaw pieces are scattered all over the world instead of on a dining room table. So we started to, you know, reach out to find, you know, descendants of survivors, relatives of survivors, you know, trying to go meet them, and then also to look at some of the various mysteries. And very quickly, I mean, it was grossly naive of us that we didn't realize from an early point that doing something on Titanic, I mean, it's right in the name, was going to be a very big project, that it was going to take a lot of person power to get it done. And, you know, that's when we started to bring together other researchers. And you know, we also found that Arthur and I are both ex-journalists, and, you know, a journalist has a toolkit that she or he goes to, you know, okay, I want you to interview this person. All right, I'm going to Google this, or I'm going to make a phone call about that, or whatever. But a genealogist tracing a family history has a different toolbox. And also we found that people in different countries, their toolboxes were slightly different, because the laws, for example, regarding privacy of family records or personal records are very different from place to place, much more than you would think so. Different between the United States and Canada, different between Canada and the United Kingdom, certainly between those three places and China. So we realized early on, once we realized that we needed help, we also realized pretty quickly that we needed local help in most of those cases. And that's how we started to put the team together.
At what point, because James Cameron was credited as executive producer, so at what point did James Cameron get involved in the project?
We actually, you know, Stephen and Arthur had always thought about getting James Cameron involved at the very beginning of the project. That was, they were telling a story about Titanic. Who doesn't think of him as someone who would, you know, go to and talk to? So we've tried to reach out to his agent or his contacts, and we thought we would be able to get to him, but we couldn't. So it wasn't until we finished all the shooting, and then one day, one of our executive producers, Nick Ware, he's based in Paris now. He was former BBC producer. So he gave us a list of like 20 emails, and he said, okay, go for it. You know, try it again and see if you can get to him. And then we tried, and one of the emails apparently was passed on to him, and he read it, and he's like, basically he wrote back to us immediately the next day, and he said, oh, I already heard about your project, I wanted to meet you. So Stephen and Arthur then went to New Zealand while he was making Avatar 2. I think he's still making now in New Zealand. And then they had an interview there, and we filmed him, and they had a chat. That was how we got him on board. to be one of our guests in the film. And also, he also said, "Oh, do you need any help? Would you like me to be your EP?" And we were like, "Yeah." So it was really amazing. The last minute, he was actually the last person, the last bit of footage that we shot for our film, and it became one of the very important moments for the film.
There's two things about Cameron that were fascinating to us. One is that you know, besides the fact he made this huge film, you know, such an influential film. Besides that, he is one of the world's great Titanic experts and experts on maritime exploration. He's dived to the deepest places. He knows a lot about shipwrecks in general, and in particular Titanic. So that was, he wasn't just James Cameron the director, although that would be enough probably. But he was also, you know, an incredibly influential and important expert on Titanic as a whole. Secondly, I think even more specific to us was that we knew from fairly early on that in the making of Titanic, he had shot a scene featuring a Chinese character. That wasn't named, but you occasionally saw them in the back of scenes. And then in one crucial scene that ended up being a deleted scene, it was deleted from the final film, but he had a character floating, a Chinese character after the sinking, floating on a piece of wood and being rescued by one of the best known lifeboats, one of the very few lifeboats that came back to pick up survivors from the water. And so we'd seen this scene earlier on, and it matched very well one of the stories that we knew had actually happened. And so we recognized that Cameron had not only put a Chinese character in the film, but also that he had some very specific knowledge about the story that, you know, was very difficult to come across. He must have taken a real interest in the story. And so we wanted to ask him some questions about that. You know, how did he come across that story? Why was it relevant to him to shoot it? You know, how did it end up being deleted from the film? And the thing we wanted to check with him was something that we'd suspected early on, which was the framing of that scene, the way it looked, the way the rescue happened, the elements that were in the scene, the piece of debris, the wood floating, the man being picked up from it by a particular lifeboat, lifeboat 14. We wondered if that had been something of an inspiration for the final scene of Jack and Rose, where Jack and Rose are in the water and Jack ends up dying and floating away, and Rose, you know, spoiler alert, is rescued by lifeboat 14. So we thought it might be an inspiration. We thought that would be a fascinating thing to bring to the story, especially for a Chinese audience, to realize that actually at the heart of this incredibly famous film that had really brought the story of Titanic to China, that, you know, was that film that made it such a big deal here. We were very curious to know if somehow the story of the guy on the door that we now know to be a man who called himself Feng Long, we wondered if that had inspired this iconic scene with Jack and Rose. So that's one of the crucial questions that we wanted to ask Cameron was, did you know enough about the story that it had inspired you for one of the main storylines? We were really fascinated by this idea of whether or not that scene that he clearly researched about and knew so much about, whether that had been a key inspiration for iconic scenes in Titanic, in the final movie as it came out. And that was one of the early questions as we sat there that we asked him. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say, I mean, if anything, I hope it elevates the meaning of our story, is that he confirmed that to us and said that story, the sort of iconic visuals of that story of Feng Long, the Chinese survivor, had led to this incredibly powerful final scene for Jack and Rose. And we were very excited about that, because that was something that we could take to a Chinese audience and say, look, at the heart of this film is something that was inspired by a story that connects to your national story, if you like.
But is James Cameron aware of the six? I mean, there were survivors. They were still, they survived. Is he aware of that?
Absolutely, he was aware of it. I mean, the research that he and his team did for their film was deep and significant. And if you go back and watch the Cameron film, you see a Chinese passenger. You don't see a number of them, but you see certainly representation of Chinese passengers at various points in the story. They kind of flit across the background, and then of course there's the deleted scene that Arthur talked about. But he was obviously aware of them, and I think actually, if you go back and watch the film, you realize that Cameron went out of his way to show that third class passengers as a group were very diverse. That numerous different groups were represented. It's not just a bunch of Irish immigrants. It's he really clearly went out of his way to show that third class was really a diverse group of people that were on the ship. And you can, with a sharp eye, you can spot the Chinese passenger sort of popping up here and there.
What is interesting when you said it's sort of like really one of the most popular film when it was shown in China. And I understand your documentary was released in China in the theater in the spring. So what was the reaction, like the reception?
Well, you can see a lot of great reviews for a film like that. I think everyone who's been to the cinemas to see our film has rated us very high scores, has given us great reviews about, not just the story itself, but also it was quite well made. Oh, thank you. So most of people their first reaction was really, because it's related, it's relevant to them. It's Chinese, their ancestors, and it's an untold story in under a very famous brand. So they were all like, oh, I haven't. Their reactions were like, oh, I would never heard of this story. Why aren't such things never been told before? And then why there was a lot of warm reaction, and then I'll let Arthur to talk about reviews, because I've covered all of those media reports. There's all sorts of English reviews and Chinese reviews in my head. It's too messy now.
Yeah, no, I mean, we had a great response to the film in general. I mean, you've got to remember, documentaries are, all over the world, but certainly it's true in China, are rarely released in cinemas. It's theatrical releases are sort of, it's an amazing opportunity. And when we realized that we had, with the early sort of humble origins of this film, with Stephen and I, trying to find time in the early years of the project, it was hard to imagine that we'd get onto the big screen. It's just something, when you make documentaries, it just seems like a very unlikely scenario. And so mid-project, we found our main backer, a theatrical distributor in China, and it became obvious that that's what the release was going to entail at the beginning. And so that just felt like a fantastic opportunity, and it gave us a big enough canvas to tell the story. And it did influence both the resources that Tong was able to bring to the project, and the way that Stephen and I framed it and thought about it. It had a sort of epic scope to it. We started thinking big in terms of researchers who would come on board, and how much we would travel around and make this a film about a journey, and how much we'd try and tell the story through the eyes of researchers and make it something that felt like living history, and not not something that was just sort of we'd uncovered the facts and here they are. Here we felt like it was important to make it into an investigation, something that felt alive. And we wanted, to be honest, we just wanted to make people feel something. We wanted them to laugh at things that were funny. Not that there are that many things that are funny in Titanic as it goes down, but there's lives that spread out across the world, and the people get married and they have kids, and it was a very expansive story. I mean, it was something that took in so much of the world and so much of these people's lives, and we just wanted to have that scope. And so bringing it to the big screen is such a fantastic opportunity to do that. We wanted people to to cry
Well, when you mentioned about the scope, I think that was one of the things that is very impressive, that in terms of, the team of researchers, the years it took, the tracing of the family. So, it seems to me a very big budget production. So was this something, is it difficult to get financing to make a documentary of this scope? Because here, say in Canada, we have a national film organization like the National Film Board, which will support the making of documentaries. But this is like a Chinese project, a Chinese production. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Well, at the beginning, what we were used to like low budget independent film documentary making. But for this one, it actually does cost a lot of money for traveling and finding local researchers and getting archives, authorization for using, even like get a copy of the Fox footage, although the rights itself is cleared for us for free, but you still have to pay quite a bit of money for like just getting the files. So all of that, it really requires much bigger budget than the usual independent documentaries. So at the point when we were trying to reach out to TV networks ourselves, at the time when we were still making it, we didn't have any distributors or sales reps. And we were basically fully funding the project by ourselves. But then at one point we were like, we can't just do it by ourselves financially. We have to find a partner. But at the time we also thought we have to take the story itself to a much wider audience. So in 2018, we decided that we wanted to bring our film to the screen, to the big screen, to have a theatrical release. So it was very clear to us that we have to find a distribution partner to help us go through this path. And we did find one in China. Basically, they also financially supported us to finish the film. And that's how we were able to finish the film and also get it distributed in China. We were quite lucky.
Yeah, well, another thing is also the timing, right? Because as you know, like after COVID, there was a wave of anti-Asian racism, especially like even in Canada and in the States, right? And so, I mean, this is sort of a timely reminder, of what happened, even though it's, long ago, but it still very much exists today. And I think it's a film that sort of asks people, to re-examine their own national history, and the kind of discrimination they have towards Chinese who make so much contribution in terms of, providing labor, So, so I understand it's released in China, but then is it also been released in the UK?
We have just started distribution after that. There is an agreement between us and the Chinese distributor. We cannot release anything until our Chinese theatrical run is finished, which is in July. Basically, in July, all our theatrical release is kind of done in China, and we started putting them in on Chinese video platforms. So now, if you have a membership, you can watch our film on iQIYI, Tencent, Youku, with a kind of membership authorization. And then our international theatrical run is just about to start. We will probably have can I say that? We'll probably have some screenings in the UK in November. And then in Australia, we were going to have a premiere in Australia, but they have, this lockdown keeps pushing the theatrical run back. So now we don't know when exactly it's going to be released in Australia, hopefully soon. And then for broadcasters, we actually have shown a shorter version, like a TV version, 60 minutes in Japan, and probably in Australia on ABC very soon, and also probably in Hong Kong sometime in the next few months. So these are so far we have these kind of updates for us, and we do have a sales agent now for our international distribution for TV and online network. So.
Well, so that's yeah, I'm very glad to see that it has you know, already have some kind of able to reach a global audience, you know. And another thing, I mean, to wrap up the discussion, I'd like to know, what about the families? You know, have they seen the finished film?
They have, yeah. They've and there are people sort of the concept of the families is a complicated one, because there are direct descendants that we found. There are other relatives, and there's an area of China where there are people who have a close connection to the story as relatives, or people who are you know, from the same area that we believe that most of the, if not all of the Chinese survivors are from. And so we've certainly made it a priority to take it out to those people and have it played, and the reaction's been you know, amazing wherever we played it, and with the families as well. Of course, from our perspective, in a way, that's the audience where you really want them to feel like it's done justice to the story. You know, it's been 100+ years, 109, 110 years, and since Titanic went down, and it's been kept under wraps for so long, this story, you know, it's not been told. And so there's this huge sense of responsibility when you take something on like this, and you want the families to think that it's a fair and balanced story about someone that they spent a lot of time helping us to get to know. And through the work that we did together, I view this always as a collaboration, you know, with those families, with them helping us to find things out. And I was so nervous, you know, about showing it to the families, about and their reaction's been incredible. And they have been so supportive of this project from the very beginning, from the first time that we reached out to them. They've been incredibly supportive and given us their time and let us into their families, and had, you know, never put pressure on us, even though it took years to pull together. And they've been so gracious in being partners in telling the story. So that's been an incredibly moving experience for us.
Yeah, what is so unusual is that, you know, the people, the ancestor would not want to tell the story, actually want to hide it, you know, and, you know, that sense of like the Chinese sense of privacy. But, you know, so this is the film, it's really a touching tribute, you know, to their sacrifice and, you know, to the dignity in surviving, you know, all these hardships and, you know, making a new life for the descendants.
One of the things we wanted to tackle was that question. You know, start a project like this, I often have a few questions in mind, and there were some that were sort of mechanical and about their survival. You know, how did they get off Titanic? How did they make it onto the lifeboats? And that's something that especially Stephen wrestled with for a long time as we worked that story out. But another part was that big sort of human question, which was, why had they not told the story? You know, why had they sat on that story for so long themselves? You know, why historically was it not told publicly, that story, and suppressed in some ways, in some senses suppressed, and why then individually I was fascinated by the idea of, is this just a thing, a cultural thing where they're being modest, or is there something else? And we ended up, I think, unpacking the complexities of that, the sort of push-pull of it, you know, that yes, there was that, the cultural aspect, the generational aspect. You know, many people from that generation all over the world wouldn't want to pass on a difficult, complicated story to their descendants. But then there was something deeper and darker to do with the way that they were discriminated against, and not wanting to, you know, to reveal their true identities, as many of that generation of Chinese immigrants, you know, felt they had to do.
thank you very much for taking the time to join us for this conversation. And I really hope the film will have reach a broader audience, including the audience in Canada, because I think we have a lot of new Asian immigrants here. And I think it's very important for this new generation of immigrants to know, what the older generation has gone through, So thank you and all the best with the film's release.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having us.
Thank you.